role-playing games make the most of their genre when incorporating techniques that encourage players to fully embody a role. And Robocop Rogue City earns its title as a role-playing Robocop game by accomplishing just that. The genre of RPG has been spaghettified into nebulousness as every single video game nowadays sticks one leg into basic RPG elements like skill trees and experience points. Say no more to those wannabe role-playing games. Robocop is here to save the day. While Robocop Rogue City has all those elements too, that's not what defines this game as the quintessential RPG for FPS fans. It's the way in which Rogue City truly makes you feel like a lumbering tin can.
You called for backup?
The original 1980s film Robocop serves a dual purpose, being a classic 80s action blockbuster, as well as a scathing cyberpunk satire exposing the dangers of megacorporations ruling the world with the almighty dollar. How relevant. It feels serendipitous that the Robocop IP would migrate towards video games to continue telling this story. Cashing in on this action-packed franchise would have been so easy by capitalizing on the action-packed art form of video games to slap the Robocop brand onto another generic, yet marketable, shooter formula. Think of how Battlefield slapped the World War I era onto its tried-and-true Battlefield gameplay, despite how inaccurate it was to the well-documented trench warfare witnessed during the Great War. Instead, Teon did the unthinkable. They cared more about making a Robocop game than making a good shooter. So Robocop isn't fast or fluid or acrobatic. He's slow, stiff, and not acrobatic. Now this sounds detrimental for a modern FPS game, I know. But it's these decisions that make the gameplay authentically radical. Heavy controls are what help players walk a mile in Robocop's lumbering robo boots, crafting the premium Robocop role-playing experience. And yes, it's as sexy as it sounds. Mobility is limited, yet Robo's destructive capabilities are endless to romanticize blunt, brutal, and efficient gameplay tactics. Robocop is the walking tank, but it's not enough to be Robocop, you gotta think like him too.
Uphold the law.
The game's clever design decisions could have ended at gameplay and still be a competent Robocop FPS made for the fans. But Rogue City goes above and beyond by exploring the original film's intriguing political themes through interactive storytelling. Corporate greed run amok in gorific fashion. That's the name of the game for Robocop the movie. And Robocop the game drives that point home through thoughtful dialogue trees. And obviously shooting the dicks of criminals, but if the combat portrays the robo half of his namesake, then the writing portrays the cop half.
When crime strikes, nothing can stop Robocop.
Dialogue choices ask, what is a cop's role to its community? Are cops purely meant to uphold the law, or responsibly serve the community? Players ponder these questions via a wide range of morally ambiguous crimes and are challenged to play their role as Robocop without the use of a gun. This duality plays into the overarching question that looms over Robocop from film to game to that one time he fought the Terminator. Is Robocop man, machine, or does he live in some kind of gray area between the two, spiraling into mental anguish over the simple question, who am I? Until the circuit boards in his brain crack and the internal bleeding of motor oil puts him in permanent sleep mode and leads the trail to heaven. Sorry about that. Serving the public trust by treating the community with empathy sheds light on Robocop's humanity. Sticking to the law reverts Robocop back to his programming to follow police procedure by the book, without room for thoughtful interpretation. Like, how many fingers does a criminal have? With the rise of today's AI art infiltrating the humanities, this subject matter touched upon in a sleazy 80s action flick is more relevant than ever. Nothing sold Teon's writing chops to me more than watching Robocop go to robotherapy. Psychologist Olivia Blanche wants to get to the root of how Robocop views his own existence. Robocop takes note of her arm, which has been replaced with a robotic arm. She explains that she lost her limb in a violent accident between an Ed 209, which mistook her for the enemy. Although she needs her cybernetics, the incident has made her apprehensive of robots in general. These therapy sessions are like watching two opposite ends of the ship of Theseus talk to one another. On a purely organic level, Robocop is mostly machine, except for a brain and a face. Meanwhile, Blanche is mostly human, except for her robotic arm. The lines drawn between robot and human are scribbled in sand, written with a colored expo marker. It's probably like yellow, because, it's not hard. Yellow's a bad color to draw on sand, which is already hard to do. Robocop's responses dictate how she views him, herself, and robo-rights in general. It begs the question, who has the authority to draw these lines in the first place? Now, the writing is no Shakespeare, but it's definitely more introspective than your average FPS with RPG aspirations. Choices tie themselves further into the themes of corporate greed with the mayoral election that looms over the main story. The ultimate decision between which politician should be mayor gets tricky when each leader has their own corrupt ulterior motives and out-of-touch rich man biases. Rogue City exploits these two questionable characters to criticize power in general and the kinds of people crazy enough to actually think they deserve to lead. Robocop is picking the lesser of two evils, but always has the opportunity to fall back on his more robotic tendencies and deliberately avoid politics. His programming is to uphold the law, nothing more. Supporting neither leaves the decision of mayor to the citizens of Detroit, who choose based on their feelings towards both the candidates and towards Robocop. If it wasn't for the many ways these politicians try manipulating both Robocop and the Detroiters, leaving it up to the people could be interpreted as the righteous choice. Each player is going to come into Robocop Rogue City with their own interpretations on the character and what he represents. They can always make decisions based on their own feelings, but Teon gives players the tools to project themselves onto Robocop and uphold their own ideal version of the treasured character. The closest any other game has come to doing this for a pre-established character is Telltale's run of Batman games. You remember the Telltale Batman game? Hell, do you remember Telltale? Do you remember Batman? It's a satisfying narrative role-playing device where choices are flexible, yet always feel consistent with the character, and they say just as much about the player as they do said character. All of this sounds like some pretty serious stuff, but it's important to mention just how funny the writing is too. Like the films before it, these heavy themes are punctuated with over-the-top satire, especially in the side quests, which turn the city of Detroit into its own character. Detroit may look dark, dangerous, and depressing, but it is juxtaposed by its inhabitants who are all colorful caricatures at rock bottom. What Detroit's open hub world lacks in size, it makes up for in depth. Every menacing alleyway hides unconventional side conversations that consistently produce a laugh. Because it's always fun to laugh at the homeless. Getting familiar with the crowd helps humanize these wacky locals that are merely down on their luck, tying into the game's morality system that revolves around the player's relationship with the people. It takes more than watching big numbers go up to be called an RPG. Luckily, Robocop Rogue City excels as an RPG by identifying what makes Robocop such a unique character and doing everything in its power to immerse the player into that role. I can't think of a better way to identify with this cyborg concoction of police brutality.